I never thought the sound of laughter could cut me open like a knife. Yet, there I was, frozen in the hallway of my parents' house, one hand braced against the wall, the other clutching my phone so tightly I thought the glass might crack. Through the narrow crack of the dining room door, I could hear them, my parents and my older sister Violet, plotting as if my life were their personal bank account. "She'll pay for everything just like last time," Violet's voice rang out, syrupy sweet, with that edge of arrogance she always carried. "That's what little sisters are for." I felt my chest tighten, a familiar pressure I hadn't known since I was a child. My parents chuckled, the sound echoing like betrayal, dressed as affection. My father cleared his throat with a kind of smug finality. "It's perfect symbolism. Her wedding, your 6th anniversary, 2 milestones, 1 grand celebration." My mother's voice followed, warm with pride. "And Hannah will make sure the finances are handled. She always does. My name, my responsibility." My prison sentence disguised as family loyalty. The blood rushed to my face, and I bit down hard on the inside of my cheek to keep from gasping. I had come home early from work that day, planning to surprise them with takeout and maybe some good news about a project at the marketing firm. Instead, I stumbled into the kind of surprise that leaves scars. I should have pushed open the door, should have confronted them, demanded answers, but I couldn't. My legs carried me backward, step by careful step, until I was in the hallway mirror staring at a reflection I barely recognized. Wide eyes, trembling lips, the posture of someone 10 years old again. Watching Violet blow out my birthday candles, while everyone applauded her generosity in letting me share. This wasn't new. 5 years earlier, Violet had announced her engagement to Thomas, and within weeks, my father had pulled me aside. Thomas had lost his job, times were hard, and family came first. I was told, no, ordered, to help. "If you really love your sister, Hannah," my mother had added, her arms folded like the final verdict. So I gave them everything, $18,000, my education fund, my future. I left college, picked up 2 jobs, and swallowed my own dreams like bitter medicine, all so Violet could walk down the aisle in a dress worth more than my car. I had sworn to myself, never again. But here I was, hearing history repeat itself, only this time it was louder, bolder, dressed up as destiny. I pressed a hand to my chest, forcing my breathing to slow, though my heart slammed against my ribs like it wanted out. I slipped quietly down the hall, out the front door, and into my car. The leather seat felt cold against my back. I didn't start the engine. I just sat there, gripping the steering wheel, staring at the cracked driveway, replaying their words in my head. And then came the twist that nearly made me drop. My phone. I checked my email out of habit, and at the top was a message I wasn't supposed to see. One of those accidental forwards that slips past even the most careful. It was from my mother, sent to Violet, confirming a pre-contract with Rosewood Manor. The signature at the bottom made my stomach drop. My name, my signature. Except I had never signed it. They hadn't just planned to use me. They had forged me. My breath came shallow, my skin prickled, and I whispered to no one in particular, "They've already trapped me." But as the thought echoed inside me, something else rose to the surface. A fire I hadn't felt in years. Maybe I was trapped. But this time, I would be the one writing the ending. If you are watching this, drop a comment telling me where you are from. Hit subscribe and stay tuned to hear how I finally stood up for myself after years of being the forgotten daughter. The truth is, my family trained me to sacrifice before I even understood the meaning of the word. I can still remember the day my father called me into his study. Violet had just announced her engagement to Thomas. She was radiant, showing off a diamond ring that seemed to sparkle brighter than the chandelier above her. 2 weeks later, Dad shut the door behind me, his voice unusually heavy. Thomas lost his job. They're in a tight spot. Family comes first, Hannah. His hand pressed down on my shoulder, anchoring me to a fate I hadn't agreed to. My mother leaned against the doorframe, arms folded, lips tight. If you really loved your sister, you'd help. Isn't that what good daughters do? I was only 22. My bank account held $18,000, my education fund, carefully saved for tuition and housing. I wanted to finish college, study communications, maybe even move to New York. Instead, I handed over every cent. It's just 1 semester, my mother promised. You can always go back. But 1 semester turned into 3. By then, I was working 2 jobs, living paycheck to paycheck, watching my dreams wither, while Violet waltzed through her lavish reception in a gown worth more than my car. I had told myself never again, never, and yet, here I was, years later, listening to them plan another theft, this time on a grander scale. My parents' voices still rang in my head as I slipped back inside the house that evening under the pretense of retrieving a sweater I'd left in my old bedroom. The truth? I needed answers. I needed proof. The family computer sat in my father's study, its screen saver glowing softly in the dim light. I wiggled the mouse, expecting to see the login screen. But to my shock, the inbox of my mother's email popped up immediately. She must have forgotten to log out. I knew I shouldn't look. It felt like trespassing into a locked diary. But something inside whispered louder than my conscience. Trust your instincts. And so I did. I clicked the first email at the top of the list. My eyes widened. It was from the venue manager at Rosewood Manor, confirming a preliminary agreement for the combined celebration. Attached was a PDF contract. My pulse pounded as I opened it. At the bottom of page 3, in black ink, sat my full name, Hannah Carter. Next to it, a signature that looked like mine, but wasn't. And right above it, in neat typeface, the words that made my stomach turn to stone. Hannah Carter will cover all costs. Not the family, not shared expenses, just me. My throat went dry, my hands trembling so violently, the mouse nearly slipped. I scrolled further, and the line items blurred into a nightmare. Catering deposits, floral arrangements, an entertainment package, amounts climbing higher with every line. This wasn't just betrayal. This was identity fraud. I backed away from the desk, pressing a fist against my lips to hold back the cry rising in my throat. My own parents had forged my signature. My sister had orchestrated it. They had built an entire celebration on the assumption that I would foot the bill, no questions asked. My chest heaved, my reflection in the darkened window, looking back at me like a stranger. For years, I had been their puppet, their safety net, their sacrificial lamb. But this was a new level of cruelty. I whispered into the empty room, my voice shaking with equal parts rage and resolve. Do I report them for fraud, or let them sign their own trap? The dining room glowed with the good china and crystal glasses we only used on holidays, a sure sign that something unpleasant was about to be wrapped in a pretty package. My mother's smile was rehearsed. My father's tie knotted a little too perfectly, and Violet, as always, was fashionably late, sweeping into the room with Thomas in tow. Once everyone settled, Mom folded her hands on the table like she was hosting a press conference. "We have the most brilliant idea," she began, her voice dripping with the kind of excitement reserved for news she already decided we'd all accept. "Why have 2 separate parties when we could combine Hannah's wedding with Violet and Thomas's 6th anniversary. One celebration, twice the meaning. I felt Robert tense beside me, his hand finding mine under the table. All eyes turned to me, waiting for my instant agreement, the automatic yes that had been conditioned into me since childhood. I forced a smile, willing my voice not to crack. "That sounds lovely," I said, nodding slowly. "I'll need some time to think about the details." The silence that followed was deafening. Dad blinked rapidly, Mom's smile froze, and Violet's mouth curled into something between shock and annoyance. But after a beat, Dad chuckled as if nothing had happened. "Always the practical one," he said, patting my shoulder with false affection. "That's why we know you'll handle the finances." Beneath the table, my phone screen glowed faintly. Before dinner had started, I had opened the voice memo app, slid the phone beside my napkin, and tapped record. Every word, every smug chuckle, every manipulation was being captured. 2 days later, I found myself at Elegance Bridal, standing on a pedestal in front of a mirror that reflected back more anxiety than joy. The A-line gown hugged my waist, its ivory fabric catching the light in a way that felt simple and perfect. Like me, not the version my family wanted me to be. Jessica, my best friend, clapped her hands. "This is the one. You look like yourself, Hannah." The bell above the boutique door jingled. I turned to see Violet stride in, oversized sunglasses perched on her head, my mother trailing close behind. "Surprise," Mom called, clapping her hands like this was some game. "We thought we'd join you." Violet circled me slowly, a predator examining prey. Her manicured finger tapped her chin. "It's a bit plain, isn't it?" Nothing like my Vera Wang. She reached for a glass of complimentary champagne from a nearby tray, swirling it lazily. "But I suppose it suits you." Then it happened. Her arm jerked suddenly, red liquid arcing through the air. The champagne splashed across the bodice of my dress, blooming like a wound across the ivory fabric. The glass shattered on the floor. "Oh no!" Violet gasped, her hand flying to her mouth in mock horror. "I'm so clumsy." The boutique owner rushed forward with club soda. But the stain spread quickly, irreversible. My mother patted my arm gently, her voice a dagger wrapped in silk. "Don't worry, dear. This was meant to be. We'll find something that complements Violet's anniversary gown." My fists clenched at my sides, but I forced a smile, pretending to accept their version of events. Inside, though, something shifted. That night, alone in my apartment, I replayed the recording from the family dinner. The words cut deeper than the ruined dress. A low whisper, my mother's voice. "Even if she refuses, we'll make sure she signs. We always do." The room spun, my stomach hollowing out as the reality settled. This wasn't carelessness. It wasn't favoritism. It was premeditated. Not just betrayal, an organized conspiracy. The next morning, I sat across from Clara in her office, my hands trembling as I slid the stack of printed emails across her desk. Clara had been my best friend since high school, the one who pulled me through late-night study sessions and heartbreaks. Now, she was the only person I trusted with this nightmare. She scanned the paper silently, her sharp eyes narrowing as she flipped from one email to the next. The quiet tick of the wall clock filled the space between us, each second stretching longer than the last. Finally, Clara looked up, her expression grim. "Hannah," she said carefully, "this isn't just manipulation. This is identity fraud. They forged your signature. That's a felony." The word felony made my stomach clench. My own parents, my own sister. It felt surreal, like I had been dropped into someone else's crime drama. I swallowed hard. So if I press charges? Clara leaned forward. They could face prison time. Even if you don't, the venue contract alone proves misrepresentation. If this ever goes to court, the evidence is stacked in your favor. I pressed my palms together, trying to steady my breathing. A part of me felt vindicated. Finally, proof that my suffering wasn't just in my head, but another part twisted with guilt. Could I really be the one to drag my parents into a courtroom? Clara wasn't finished. She pulled another file from her drawer, tapping the highlighted section. "And this," she said, "is worse. I checked public financial records. Your parents accessed an inherited trust left by your grandmother. They shifted funds into Violet's account without your consent." The words hit me like a punch. My grandmother's trust was supposed to help me finish college someday. Instead, it had been siphoned away to fuel Violet's endless appetite for extravagance. I covered my mouth, tears stinging my eyes. They stole from her too." Clara nodded gently, but her voice was firm. "If you wanted, Hannah, you could take this to the police right now. Fraud, theft, forgery. Your parents and Violet could all be prosecuted." The room spun. My childhood memories, birthday cakes, Christmas mornings, Sunday dinners, collapsed under the weight of Clara's words. The very people who raised me were guilty of crimes I wouldn't expect from strangers. She reached across the desk, her hand warm on mine. "The question is, what do you want? Revenge, justice, or just freedom?" Her words echoed through me. Would you protect your peace or your parents' reputation? That night, back in my apartment, I sat at the kitchen table, the evidence spread out like a battlefield. My phone buzzed on the counter, a new message from an unknown number. I opened it, and my blood ran cold. "They know you've seen the files." By the time Sunday dinner rolled around again, I had already made up my mind. I would play their game, but on my terms. The dining table was once more set with the special occasion china. Candles flickering, like little witnesses. Mom launched straight into talk of color schemes. Violet had a folder of floral samples, and Dad kept dropping hints about how many corporate friends he had already invited. I smiled sweetly, keeping my tone calm. "You're right. Combining the celebrations does make sense." For a split second, the room froze. Then, Violet clapped her hands together, like a child on Christmas morning. "I knew you'd come around. Oh, Hannah, this is going to be legendary." My parents exchanged smug glances, relieved that the good daughter was back in line. Only Robert, sitting beside me, felt my fingers tighten around his under the table. He knew the smile on my face wasn't surrender. It was strategy. The very next morning, Violet's social media exploded with headlines. Sisters join in one grand celebration. She had given quotes to a local lifestyle magazine, complete with photos of herself in a sparkling anniversary gown, as if my wedding were nothing more than a prop to highlight her triumph. I stared at the article on my phone, bile rising in my throat. But instead of breaking, I laughed. Every word she spoke to the press would only make her fall harder. Because what Violet didn't know was that I had already met with Clara. Together, we sat in a quiet corner of her office, drafting an addendum to the Rosewood Manor contract. The language was clear, airtight. The sole responsible parties for financial obligations were the signatories, my parents and Violet. Since they had entered agreements using my forged signature, my only contribution would be a capped deposit already documented. When the venue manager reviewed the revised clause, Clara slid across the notarized statement, her voice crisp. "This protects Hannah from any liability. She will pay exactly what she agreed, nothing more." The manager hesitated, but eventually nodded. If this is what the contract holder signed, then this is binding. By the time I left Clara's office, the sun had set, painting the Boston skyline in deep reds and golds. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe. The trap they had set for me was now quietly snapping shut on themselves. 3 nights later, just as Robert and I sat down to dinner, my phone rang. The caller ID, Mom. I hesitated, then answered on speaker. Her voice was frantic, stripped of its usual polish. Hannah, what did you do? The venue says there's a second contract, something with your lawyer's stamp on it. They're saying we're liable for the balance, not you. Dad's voice bellowed in the background. This has to be a mistake. Tell them it's void. I glanced at Robert, who simply nodded. My voice came out calm, steady. It's not void. It's official. Clara notarized it. There's no reversing it now. There was a long silence on the line, punctuated only by Violet's shrill outburst. She tricked us. Robert reached across the table, squeezing my hand as I ended the call. The echo of their panic still rang in my ears, but instead of dread, I felt something else. The chandeliers at Rosewood Manor glittered like 100 watchful eyes as I walked into the grand ballroom with Robert at my side. The air smelled of polished wood and expensive flowers. My parents stood with the venue manager, Mr. Phillips, a thick contract resting on the mahogany table between them. Violet hovered nearby in a fitted emerald dress, her smile sharp enough to cut glass. Finally, Dad said, his voice carrying that old authority. We're ready for signatures. He pulled a pen from his jacket pocket with a flourish. The gesture of a man convinced he was in control. I sank into the chair across from him, folding my hands carefully. The contract lay open in front of me, rows of numbers dancing like a cruel joke. $74,000 in total. Mr. Phillips adjusted his glasses. We'll need a signed check to cover the deposit today. Once that's cleared, we'll begin preparations immediately. Mom's hand slid the checkbook across the table toward me, her smile brittle. Just write it out, Hannah. You know this is what family does. For a moment, the room seemed to hold its breath. I reached for my bag, my fingers brushing against the folder I'd tucked inside. Slowly, I pulled it free and laid it flat on the table. What's this? Dad asked, irritation flashing in his eyes. Proof, I said evenly. Emails, screenshots of credit card charges, and a recording from our last dinner. Robert leaned forward and pressed play on my phone. Violet's voice spilled into the room, clear and sharp. She'll pay for everything, just like she did for my wedding. That's what little sisters are for. The sound of my parents' laughter followed, filling the silent ballroom. Mr. Phillips' jaw tightened as he looked from the phone to the contract in front of him. My mother's smile collapsed. Dad paled, his hand frozen midair above the papers. You forged my signature, I continued, sliding the pages across the table. You stole from Grandma's trust. You used my credit card without permission. This, I tapped the contract, is built on fraud. The silence was suffocating. Robert's hand tightened around mine, steady as steel. For the first time, my family looked cornered. But then, instead of standing, instead of walking out or calling the police as I could have, I closed the folder and set it aside. I'm not pressing charges, I said softly. Mom's head jerked up. You're not what? I'll let you sign. I continued, my voice calm, deliberate. Go ahead. Pretend it's all normal. Pretend I'm still the obedient daughter who pays for everyone's mistakes. The room buzzed with disbelief. Robert shot me a questioning glance, but I kept my gaze on my parents. I wanted them to believe, even for a moment, that they still had the upper hand. because the truth was, every pen stroke would only tighten the trap Clara and I had already prepared. Mr. Phillips cleared his throat. "Shall we proceed?" Dad snatched the pen like a drowning man, grabbing for a rope. He signed with a shaky flourish, then pushed the contract toward Violet. She scribbled her name, her smile returning, as if victory were once again hers. I watched quietly, my face unreadable. Some viewers might call me cruel for letting them continue, for not stopping the farce while I could. Others might wonder why I didn't end it right then, but I knew. Sometimes the strongest move is letting the guilty walk straight into their own downfall. As we stood to leave, Violet leaned in close, her perfume cloying, her whisper venomous. "If you ruin this, I'll tell Robert about your college secret." My stomach lurched. The chandelier light flickered above us, and for a moment, the entire ballroom seemed to tilt. The morning of the wedding dawned bright and sharp, sunlight spilling across the lake as if the universe itself had chosen sides. I stood at the edge of the water, my simple lace dress brushing against the grass, Robert's hand warm in mine. Around us, only 25 of our closest friends and family gathered, their laughter and quiet conversations blending with the sound of birds overhead. It wasn't grand. There were no chandeliers or champagne towers, just wildflowers from Robert's mother's garden, white lights strung between birch trees, and a wooden arch we decorated ourselves. For the first time, I felt like the day belonged to me. Across town, Rosewood Manor was buzzing with a different kind of energy. 210 guests sat in rows of gold chairs, fanning themselves impatiently as they waited. The grand ballroom, dripping in crystal and roses, echoed with murmurs. My parents paced near the doors. Violet checked her reflection in every surface, and the venue manager cleared his throat nervously as the clock ticked on with no bride in sight. Back at the chapel, Robert's father began the ceremony. His voice carried through the trees, gentle and steady. "Today, we gather to witness a union built on love and truth." My chest ached with relief. For once, the words felt real. Jessica snapped photos on her old Nikon, capturing smiles instead of staged perfection. Clara read a short passage about freedom and boundaries, her voice catching when she looked at me. Emily held the rings. Every person here knew the truth and chose to stand by me. By the time Robert kissed me under the birch arch, my parents were still making excuses to restless guests at Rosewood. "Traffic," my mother stammered. "Hair emergency," Violet added, with a laugh that sounded forced. But whispers spread quickly. People glanced at their watches, shook their heads, muttered about poor planning. The catering team brought out trays of untouched hors d'oeuvres. The champagne tower stood lonely in the center, glasses trembling as if they sensed the collapse to come. And then came the first questions. Who's paying for all this? At the chapel, we signed our marriage license and shared homemade cake baked by Mrs. Sullivan. The sweetness of the frosting was nothing compared to the taste of freedom blooming inside me. But Violet's words from Rosewood echoed faintly in my memory. "If you ruin this, I'll tell Robert about your college secret." When the moment came, I leaned close to my husband, my voice steady. "She threatened me with something from years ago. When I was 20, I made a mistake. I thought it would break us if you knew." Robert smiled faintly, brushing a strand of hair from my cheek. "Hannah, I've known since the day we got serious. Nothing you did back then changes how I see you now." Relief surged through me, stronger than any vow spoken at an altar. Violet's weapon had already been diffused long before she wielded it. Meanwhile, at Rosewood, chaos grew. Guests began to leave, muttering about wasted time. The venue manager approached my parents with the bill in hand. His voice clipped. "The deposit has cleared. The remaining $74,000 is due." My father blanched. My mother fumbled for excuses. And Violet, cornered, snapped at them both, her mask slipping in front of everyone. It was then Thomas, her husband, stepped closer, his voice cutting through the noise. His eyes narrowed, his expression tight. "So, you did this to your sister before too?" he asked, his tone flat, devastating. Violet froze, the words hanging in the air like a guillotine. The fallout from Rosewood was swift and merciless. Within weeks, my parents had drained their retirement savings to cover the balance of the $74,000 bill. The country club whispered about them. Their friends stopped calling, and even the aunts who once gushed about family loyalty kept their distance. Violet's world unraveled more quietly, but no less painfully. Thomas, humiliated in front of 200 guests, told her he would not stay married to someone who treated people like stepping stones. Therapy, he said, or divorce. For once, Violet had no comeback. She began attending weekly sessions, her sharp edges dulled not by choice, but by necessity. As for me, Robert and I slipped easily into our new life. Our wedding photos, real wedding photos, hung above our mantel, the lake in the background, our laughter unposed. The $6,000 I had paid as my freedom fee felt less like a loss and more like the best investment of my life. Clara joked that my case would make a great law school lecture, and Jessica still laughed about the champagne tower that never got poured. But beneath the relief, I carried scars. Family betrayal doesn't fade overnight. Sometimes I woke in the middle of the night, hearing Violet's voice in my head. "She'll pay for everything." And yet, as time passed, I realized those words no longer held me captive. 1 year later, almost to the day, the doorbell rang on a crisp November afternoon. Through the glass, I saw her, Violet, standing alone on my porch. No emerald gown, no dramatic entrance, just a woman with slumped shoulders and eyes that looked older than her 32 years. I opened the door, my heart steady in a way it had never been before. "I came to apologize," she said softly, her voice stripped of its usual sharpness. I studied her face. For so long, every word from her had carried an agenda, a calculation. But this time, I saw something different. Humility, fear, maybe even hope. "Mom and Dad had to use everything they had to pay Rosewood," she continued, glancing at the ground. "Thomas nearly left me. It was a wake-up call. I'm in therapy now. It's hard, but I'm trying." For a moment, I saw not the rival who ruined my dress or forged my name, but the little girl who once held my hand on the first day of kindergarten. "You're welcome here as my sister," I told her gently, "not as my rival." Her eyes filled, and for the first time in years, she didn't argue. She just nodded. That evening, as Robert poured wine and our friends gathered around the table, I thought about how far we had come. No lavish ballrooms, no staged perfection, just warmth, honesty, and chosen family. I raised my glass, feeling the weight of the past year settle into perspective. "What do you think hurts more?" I asked quietly. "Losing money or losing trust forever?" The room fell silent, each person considering the question. Some smiled sadly, some shook their heads, but all of them understood, because in the end, the story wasn't about $74,000 or one ruined dress. It was about boundaries, the kind I had never dared to draw until it was almost too late. Boundaries that didn't make me cold or cruel, but finally made me whole. I've learned that freedom can be expensive, but it is always worth the price, and that drawing a line isn't the end of love. It's the beginning of love that's real, love that respects, love that lasts. As I looked at Violet helping clear the dishes, quieter now, more careful, I allowed myself the smallest hope. Maybe one day, the love we lost could return. Not the love of obligation, but the love of choice. And in that moment, I knew my story wasn't about revenge. It was about finally choosing myself and building a life where love could exist without chains.